Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning into this workshop today. I'm going to be talking to you about how you can use writing to enrich your personal life. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Mindy Radke, and I am a master's student in rhetoric and composition at Texas State University. I'm going to be graduating in May 2024. And I wanted to also give you some background about this workshop before we get started. This has evolved from several iterations, starting with a workshop that I helped Dr. Joanna Collins work on at Texas State University. That workshop that she produced was called Right Now, How to Get Out of Your Head and Get Words on the Page, or something similar to that. And it was targeted at just graduate students in general at Texas State who were working on longer writing projects such as journal articles, theses, and dissertations. And then a later edition of that workshop was one that I worked on called Writing Productively. It was also targeted towards graduate students, but this time at a writing lab specifically for Doctor of Nurse Practitioner students. So the earlier editions of this workshop were targeted towards academic writing and people working on academic writing projects. And what I found was a lot of that information was useful in teaching my undergraduate students about improving their relationships with writing and developing those skills right at the start of their college career. And then what I found was that a lot of that information was actually pretty intriguing to my friends, family, peers, and my personal life. And I ended up having a lot of really clandestine conversations about the power of writing and people disclosing to me their longing to utilize writing in their everyday life, whether it's for work or for self-care, or just to discover more creative processes as a hobby. And I want people to take this workshop and discover how they can use the information to help them reach their professional goals in their careers, or also just their personal life and personal enrichment. As we'll see at the end of the workshop, a lot of the strategies work the same no matter what your goal is. And so a lot of the people that I am aiming for this workshop to reach are going to have varying relationships with writing. Maybe you already consider yourself a writer, maybe you're a journaler, or maybe the last time you wrote was back in grade school and you don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Regardless of what your relationship with writing currently is like, I hope that you will find some of this information useful and discover new ways to transform this relationship and approach your goals differently. So throughout this workshop, we're going to reflect on our relationship with writing and understand how that relationship came to be, getting an understanding of our background in order to see a way forward. I'm going to explain to you the benefits of healthy relationships with writing, and then we're going to talk about how to build those healthy writing habits. So if you take a look at the images on the right, they may evoke some feelings of nostalgia. They may remind you of when you started to learn how to read and write. Maybe with that nostalgia, there's a bit of stress involved. What I want you to know now is that whatever your relationship is, it's okay. It's valid. It's okay to not like writing, but it's also not too late to start writing. Writing doesn't come naturally for everyone, and not only has had to overcome the challenges that you might have had to overcome in order to gain your literacy skills. All of your relationships are unique, and they're shaped by different people, institutions, and events. So with that in mind, I want you to know that there's no such thing as a bad writer, even if that is how you self-identify. In my teaching and consulting experience, most people approach our appointments and our time together with that disclosure that they are a bad writer. And so to go easy on them or to be gentle and kind with feedback, I would say that if you feel like you're a bad writer, you're actually in the majority of people. It's very normal to have that feeling towards this skill. In my personal opinion, there's no such thing as a bad writer. There are only people who have yet to find their vibrant voice, yet to find ways to be efficient and room to grow. Our relationships to writing are complicated, and these two word clouds on the right show that. The top one was created by a researcher named Helen Sword, who interviewed graduate writers and faculty to ask them to describe their relationship to writing in one word. And there were a lot of mixed responses. And I asked my freshman writers the same thing: describe your relationship to writing in one word. And there was also a mixed bag, albeit a little bit more humorous one. Some people were writing situationship, lovesick. some of those words were pretty entertaining. But many people, when they look at these word clouds, are kind of surprised to see themselves represented and represented so frequently, especially with the negative feelings towards writing. So I hope you find some validation in that representation, but also see the difference between these undergraduate writing responses and the graduate and faculty writing responses. There's a mixed bag in both, and that tells us that no matter how good you get at writing, it's always going to be a complicated relationship that needs to be worked on. But what you can find comfort in is that even though it's always going to be a little bit complicated, the reasons for that complication become different. And it becomes more rewarding to work through those negative feelings. One of the ways that we can stop putting so much pressure on ourselves with writing is by reframing what we believe good writing and good writers are. This quote is from one of my favorite writing handbooks called Several Short Sentences About Writing by Verlyn Klinkenborg. This book is really interesting because it's written in entirely short sentences and fragments. And what that does is it reframes good writing as something that has to do with thinking, noticing, and learning. This reframes writing as a discovery process that lets us be content to proceed in the writing process, even if we don't feel like we have all of the tools that we need when we start. Sometimes when we start a writing process, we don't even know what our needs are, but we'll discover it along the way. As we consider why our relationships with writing are the way they are, I want you to consider this concept of sponsors of literacy. And this was a notion conceived of by Deborah Brandt, who defined sponsors of literacy as any agents, local or distant, concrete or abstract, who enable, support, teach, model, as well as recruit, regulate, suppress, or withhold literacy and gain advantage by it in some way. So what Deborah Brandt is trying to show is that there are actual, like I said earlier, people, institutions, events that shape the literacy that we acquire. It is dependent on outside factors. So again, if you consider yourself a bad writer, you can rest assured that some of those things are beyond your control, and it's not too late to take control. So with this activity, I want you to pause the video and try and brainstorm what you consider to be concrete sponsors of literacy and abstract sponsors of literacy, maybe for people in general or for your life specifically. So the concrete sponsors are going to be actual people, actual places, things, events, institutions, and the abstract ones are maybe harder to nail down. So go ahead and pause the video to think about these things. I want to start with the concrete sponsors. These are what people usually come up with when we do this activity. Your family, friends, teachers, legislators, mentors, publishers, writers, and companies. All of these people gain advantage in some way from your literacy. And for the ones at the bottom, I actually put in parentheses maybe some of the more abstract institutions that gain advantage by it in some way. For example, with the economy, they want you to be a literate person insofar as they can profit off of your literacy, or your literacy can be used to facilitate consumerism. And also similar with the government, they want you to be a literate person insofar as you can participate in governmental processes that benefit those people and systems involved. Religion is another interesting one. Some people bring up like Sunday youth group, reading the Bible study as a way that they gained their literacy. That benefits religious institutions because you become a religious person who participates in that institution. On the left, we have the more abstract sponsors, and these are actually sponsors that my students came up with when they wrote narratives about their sponsors of literacy. I was really excited to see them thinking out of the box with these things. One student said that curiosity, just an intrinsic wondering about the world, helped them become literate. Some people talked about their learning disabilities that really hindered their ability to learn how to read and write. They were obstacles to overcome, but on the other hand, some people talked about the resources and extra support that they gained from these learning disabilities that helped them become better readers and writers. curriculum, speaking different languages, the technology we use shapes how we learn to read and write and how we use reading and writing in our everyday lives. The example that Deborah Brandt gives in her article is the printing press. The printing press transformed people's literacy when it emerged. Instead of printing requiring specialized skills from the people who worked in the press, it was automated, and the people who worked in the press didn't have to have that higher level of expertise with their literacy. So their literacy ended up being suppressed because of what the work now required. But in contrast, greater literacy across the population was achieved because reading materials were more accessible and widely disseminated. So technology affects who becomes literate, how, and why. Think about ChatGPT, large language models. That is transforming how people think about writing and how they're going to end up using it. That's a very pertinent one to our times today. I'm going to be focusing on diaries and personal writing as a sponsor of literacy. And this is what I wrote a literacy narrative about way back in the day when I was an undergraduate. I found that if writing is a skill that takes practice hours and dedication to improve at, then diary writing, even if it's inconsequential and for yourself, constitutes as practice hours that improve your writing and literacy over time. That was just my idea, and without prompting, one of my students ended up writing about the same thing. He kept a diary and wanted to write about how that transformed his relationship with literacy and uses of writing. So we've established that your relationship with writing is valid as it is. Some things were and always will be out of your control, but now you know it's possible to explore potentially more agentic experiences and habits with writing. They say that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. If we want to break it down mathematically, if you were to write for 1 hour every single day, it would take you 27 years to become an expert at writing. Well, I'm here to tell you that you don't have to wait for a quarter of your life to reap the same benefits of writing as those expert hours, because they also say that it takes 21 days to form a habit. And I don't know about you, but I can commit to 21 days a lot easier than I can commit to 27 years. And not only that, you definitely don't have to write for an hour each day. Another fantastic writing handbook is written by Joan Bulker. She's one of the creators of the Harvard University Writing Center. And she recommends writing in 15 minutes a day. Now, this book is targeted at graduate level writers, but she recommends, instead of excessive and extensive spurts of writing, she recommends moderation and regularity. Not only does this make you a happier and healthier writer, it also makes you a better writer too. Because with this kind of routine, it improves the quality of the writing that you do produce when you sit down to write. But like we mentioned in the beginning of the workshop, you might not be working on a dissertation, and your goals are probably different than academic writing goals. I want you to consider the benefits of reflective journaling. If you've ever gone to some sort of therapy or maybe looked into different self-care options, you may have considered reflective journaling before. I want to reiterate that the benefits from reflective journaling are backed up by research. So these benefits are pulled from a research study by Steve Portman, and this researcher required daily reflective journaling by his elementary school students. And I know you all are not in elementary school, but you still stand to gain these kinds of benefits. And while you stand to gain these kinds of benefits, your writing skills will also improve along the way. And so I want you to also consider the benefits that you can gain from creative writing. These ones were pulled from a study by Sandbeck, Forcell, and others that asked creative writers the benefits they felt that they had gained from regular creative writing in a workshop that they hosted. And I was surprised to see that some of these were more introspective than the ones listed in the reflective journaling article, because reflective journaling to me feels like the more introspective practice. So this just goes to show, if you have always been a reflective journaler, try creative writing. If you've always been a creative writer, try reflective journaling. Play around with those genres and don't hold yourself to one specific type of writing. It's beneficial to experiment. And then also the benefits here, even though these are pulled from those research articles, certainly are not mutually exclusive. They can apply to both. My favorite response that was listed in this article from one of the participants was when they said that they were able to find mercy towards their self by connecting the young and adult versions of their self in writing. So returning to the research by Steve Portman, he outlined his best practices for regular writing on the left. And all of these points are crucial, but I really want to emphasize the killing your inner critic. He says quieting, I say killing. Kill that negative inner critic. The biggest issue that I see holding writers back, who I've worked with, is the fear of readability and mistakes as they're going. Writing regularly requires you to radically accept your errors and move on from them, especially if you're not going to have an external audience. Who cares if it's readable? Who cares if it's incoherent? You are the author, you are your own audience. So if it makes sense and if it's purposeful and meaningful to you, that is all you're aiming for. If you are going to have an external audience, save the editing for last, because worrying about editing gets in the way of the process of getting the actual words on the page. If you try and vet your words in your head before they're even on the page, they're never going to get out. It's okay to save editing for last. If something like fear of writing badly is holding you back, then make it your goal to write badly. We also recommend, in order to write regularly, you should do these things on the right: scheduling regular, frequent times to write, allowing yourself flexibility in order to not feel guilt if you don't meet your goals, setting micro goals, number of words, number of pages. Again, it's okay if they're bad. Don't make quality your goal on the first try that you write something. Start small, allow yourself room to grow. Prioritize writing for the best part of your day. So for me personally, this is not between the hours of 3 and 5 p.m. every day. That is my crash time. That is my nap time. I am not fully functioning at that time in the day. There is a negative perception behind writing late at night, but if that's what works for you and your writing, then that's okay. But also don't hold yourself to one way of writing that you have come to believe is the right way to do it for you. Still be open to experimenting. I was a late night writer, and then I started waking up at 6 a.m. to start writing. And even though I am not a morning person, I produce really quality and exciting, vibrant writing at that time. I don't do it often, but I know it's something that can and does work for me. So you should be open to experimenting with different things you haven't tried before, or things that you may have a preconceived notion of not working. I want to talk about this last one called parking on the uphill slope. This is just a fun way of saying take breaks often. So if you are writing and you are hitting a stride and your ideas are flowing, you may want to stop and take a break, because once you get started again, you're already at the top of the slope and you have more ideas to write about. It's just downhill from there, and it's easier to go downhill than uphill. The other side of that being, if you write and write and write until all of your ideas are out, then when you get started again, you're not going to be starting with any ideas and you're going to be going uphill when you start. That's harder. And the more often you start and stop your writing, the easier it is to get into that flow state once you start, because you do this every day. Another activity that I have for you is to schedule your writing. One of the recommendations that we had was to schedule regular and frequent times to write. You get to decide what that frequency is. For me, I'm recommending to you to write 15 minutes a day, but maybe you need to start smaller. Start with 5 minutes a day. Hell, start with even 1 minute a day. 3 times a week. Just get in the habit of getting out your writing apparatus. It's also important to plan bonus or backup time if you do hit that stride and want to keep going, but also remember, park on the uphill slope. Make it easier for yourself to start going downhill when you start your writing again in the next session. Put it on your calendar. This only works if you are really willingly engaged with this idea, but you don't want yourself to feel guilty if you don't meet these goals, if you miss a session. That will be something that makes this relationship with writing unhealthy. If it's infected with guilt and shame, should not be a shameful or guilty process. It's okay to write badly. It's okay to engage in this process a little bit badly and to mess up, because the idea is, by starting and trying, you're doing better than you were before. When you schedule your writing, I want you to also consider what you need to schedule around your writing. Maybe scheduling and routines are hard for you. They're certainly hard for me. And before I can even think about scheduling my writing, I need to think about scheduling other things like groceries and homework or ultimate frisbee practice. So during this time, if you need to schedule other things first, that's okay. If that will help you eventually get to the point where you can schedule your writing, that is progress. So go ahead and pause the video to get started on your scheduling. Now that we're starting to turn writing into a habit, I want to talk about the difference between having writing as a habit and having writing as a ritual. I know many people and their writing rituals that have changed throughout the years. So I have a professor who always says that she wakes up at 6 a.m., goes to the kitchen with a single candle and writes by the candlelight. And I have another friend who's a compulsive notes app poetry person. And then one of my other colleagues swears by the morning pages. An article by Sydney Alexis takes a look at 3 users of Moleskine notebooks to see what kind of habits they've formed with the Moleskine notebook specifically. And it's an interesting study because the brand has such a, I guess, cult of personality behind it, calling the notebook a companion to writers and artists. Fans of this kind of notebook specifically say that it helps them see themselves as a writer and it helps them get into the lifestyle of writing. I don't necessarily endorse the company or anyone's assertion that paper pen is more sacred than using technology and like your phones and your computers to write. I have some professors that are just appalled that some of our freshman writers write whole essays on their notes app. But I say what's more sacred is the willingness to be open to different ways of writing and an openness to let them go when they no longer serve you or your writing process. So the article, The Symbolic Life of the Moleskine Notebook, shows the way that these users create not only rituals for themselves, but also rules governing how they can and can't use their own notebook. And so rituals like these are helpful when it helps you see writing as a sacred act that you want to participate in. But when it gets to the side of it being rules and causing some anxiety about how you can and can't use the notebook, that's erring on the side of a stressful writing practice, perhaps an unhealthy writing practice. So I encourage you to consider what kind of habitat and rituals and artifacts can help you get excited about writing, but be careful not to revere these rules so much that they get in the way of your freedom in your writing process. So it can be a Moleskine notebook that helps you see it as a exciting ritual, or it can be like getting yourself a treat, like sitting down for coffee, going to coffee shops, writing only at your desk or only in bed. These are some things you can consider and experiment with, just like the time of day, to see what gets you the most excited about writing. But if it starts to feel like you're restricting your own freedom, trying to stick to these rituals, abandon them. Give yourself the freedom to abandon things and continue trying new things. So for our next activity, we're going to do another writing session. If you have scheduled your writing for 15 minutes a day or 5 or however much works for you, we're going to get started with that right now. Today is day 1. What's unique about a Pomodoro session from just like a 15-minute session is that in the Pomodoro session, you are supposed to write nonstop. You're supposed to be focused nonstop on the activity at hand. So if you are writing, this is where it really counts to be overlooking the errors and radically accepting the mess you're making as you go. To ensure focus on not stopping, if you're writing on your laptop, I really recommend lowering it to where you can't see the screen as you're typing. Or if you're handwriting, I recommend using another sheet of paper to cover up your progress so you can't see what you've written. After this activity, we're going to reflect on how this went. So go ahead and pause the video now. Now that you have completed your first writing session, let's reflect on it a little bit. If you are typing on a computer, there should be a word count, hopefully, and check how many words you were able to get out in 15 minutes. Or if you're handwriting, count how many sentences you've written. Is it more or less than you expected? Also consider the lexical errors that are probably in there if you weren't looking at the screen or paper as you were going. Consider if they affect the readability of what you wrote, and consider how easily fixable they are. Take note if anything was redundant or if anything was super compelling. Where do you feel like you want to expand on and keep writing about? Those places that are really compelling are great places to stop, so you can easily start there during your next session. Taking all of these things into consideration should help you consider what are good goals to set for your future sessions. Take a look at your word count, maybe increase it by 50 or 100 and challenge yourself to write a little bit more next time. So now that we've talked about how writing can help your overall well-being and what it's like to get in the habit of writing, I want to circle back to the practical benefits of writing. If you are out of school and don't have a lot of writing responsibilities, writing is still important to our everyday lives. Take a look at this list. Some of these things are more inconsequential than others, like comments or TikTok monologues. I'm guessing not a lot of you are TikTok influencers, but writing and being a good writer can help you with those things. Some of the things are more important, like cover letters and personal statements, even emails. They require you to have strong control of your diction and knowing your audience and control over your rhetoric. You may not be searching for jobs right now and writing cover letters left and right, but that is a high stakes writing responsibility that really matters when you do get to that point. To quote Verlin Klinkenborg from that writing handbook, several short sentences about writing, knowing what you're trying to say is important, but knowing what you've actually said is crucial. And practicing writing can help you gain more control over those things that you are trying to say. You may notice that a lot of these examples of writing involve other people. That's where knowing your rhetoric and being able to collaborate with others is absolutely crucial. A lot of the research referenced here in this workshop discuss how benefits are compounded when you start sharing your writing and involving other people in your writing process. I do have another writing workshop called Writing Collaboratively that will be worth checking out. That one was written for the nursing program writing lab, so it is targeted towards a graduate audience, but I think it will be applicable and you can benefit from watching it regardless. Our time together is coming to a close, so I just want to leave you with these final thoughts. A writer is somebody who writes. So you can become a writer by willfully engaging with this process. And you become a good writer by being someone who thinks, notices, and learns on the page. Writing is a discovery process. We've talked about the ways you can build writing as a habit, and I hope you have noticed by now that it's not just writing. Writing is just one of the many muscles that needs to be exercised for our overall well-being. And I hope that if you are already somebody who writes, you experiment with different genres to challenge yourself and really flex that muscle. Or if you're somebody who hasn't written much before this, I hope that the start of your journey goes well from here. If you've enjoyed this workshop, or if you start putting some of these things into practice, please let me know. I've included my contact information below. That's my academic email. And then that is a Twitter or X handle for my academic professional profile. I'm really curious to know how these things work out for you, or if you have other ideas. Also, if you enjoyed this workshop and want me to deliver this kind of information to your organization or your company or your class, I would love to be a guest speaker to help people develop those skills in a group setting. You may also consider that collaboration workshop. There are also activities that require people working together in that one too. Thank you so much for your time today and willingness to learn. I look forward to reading what you write.